May 12, 1944. 4,000 feet above the North Sea, Admiral Heinrich Krüger stood on the bridge of the German cruiser Prinz Hermann, watching the horizon through his binoculars. The morning mist clung to the water like a shroud, and his radar operators had just detected what appeared to be a massive formation of aircraft approaching from the west. What they believed to be a routine reconnaissance mission was about to become one of the most shocking demonstrations of Allied air superiority that any German naval commander would ever witness. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how one German admiral's moment of triumph turned into a devastating realization about the true scale of Allied production capabilities and how a single radio transmission would reveal the overwhelming industrial might that had been building beyond their comprehension. Admiral Krüger had spent 32 years in the German Navy, beginning as a young midshipman aboard the battlecruiser Goeben during the previous global conflict. He had witnessed the final months of that earlier struggle, watching as German naval power crumbled under the weight of Allied blockades and industrial superiority. The Treaty of Versailles had reduced the German fleet to a shadow of its former strength, but Krüger had remained loyal through the lean years, serving aboard coastal patrol vessels and training ships. During the rebuilding period, he had commanded the destroyer Z-7 Hans Lodi, participating in the early convoy raids that had initially proven so successful. His tactical acumen had earned him recognition from fleet headquarters, and his steady nerves under fire had made him a favorite of his crews. The Iron Cross First Class pinned to his uniform jacket had been earned during a desperate night action off the Norwegian coast, where his destroyer had engaged 3 Allied vessels simultaneously. Now at 54, he commanded one of the most advanced cruisers in the fleet. The Prinz Hermann displaced 11,000 tons fully loaded and measured 540 feet from bow to stern. Her 8 6-inch guns were arranged in 4 twin turrets, capable of hurling 250-pound shells to a range of 25,000 yards. Secondary armament consisted of 12 4-inch guns for anti-aircraft defense, supplemented by numerous smaller caliber weapons. The ship's crew of 740 men represented some of the finest naval personnel in the fleet. Chief Petty Officer Klaus Weber had served aboard cruisers for 18 years and could identify aircraft types at distances that amazed younger sailors. Gunnery Officer Lieutenant Commander Friedrich Hoffmann had graduated top of his class from the Naval Academy and could place shells within 50 yards of their target at maximum range. Her crew of 740 men had been drilling for months in preparation for this patrol. The Prinz Hermann's engines, twin-shaft propulsion systems developing 68,000 horsepower, could drive the ship at 32 knots in calm seas. Her armor belt, 4 inches of hardened steel, provided protection against most naval gunfire, while her deck plating could resist bombing attacks from conventional aircraft. The radar contact had first appeared at 0600 hours 40 nautical miles to the southwest. Lieutenant Hans Müller, the radar operator, had called it in immediately. At 23 years old, Müller was one of the youngest officers aboard the Prinz Hermann, but his expertise with the advanced radar equipment was unquestioned. He had trained for 6 months at the Naval Electronics School in Kiel, mastering the intricacies of the SeaTac radar system that had been installed aboard the cruiser just 8 months earlier. The SeaTac equipment represented the pinnacle of German radar technology. Operating at a frequency of 375 MHz, it could detect large aircraft formations at ranges exceeding 50 nautical miles under ideal atmospheric conditions. The rotating antenna mounted on the ship's superstructure completed 1 full revolution every 15 seconds, providing continuous coverage of the surrounding area. Müller's station consisted of a circular cathode ray tube display, 12 inches in diameter, with a green phosphorescent screen that showed radar contacts as bright blips. Range rings marked at 5-mile intervals allowed precise distance measurements, while bearing information was provided by the antenna's rotation angle. The system required constant attention. Atmospheric conditions, sea state, and equipment temperature all affected its performance. The initial reading showed approximately 60 aircraft in formation, flying at 8,000 feet and approaching at a steady 200 miles per hour. The contacts appeared as a cluster of bright dots on Muller's screen, their intensity indicating large, multi-engine aircraft rather than fighters. The formation's precise geometry, aircraft spaced at exact intervals in perfect alignment, suggested veteran aircrew rather than inexperienced pilots. Standard operating procedure required immediate notification to Fleet Command whenever formations of more than 20 aircraft were detected. Mueller had memorized the communication protocols during his training, understanding that early warning could mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic surprise. "Admiral," Mueller called from his station, his voice carrying the excitement of a young officer who had never seen major combat. "The formation is maintaining course and speed. Range now 35 miles and closing. Sir, the radar signature indicates these are heavy bombers, not reconnaissance aircraft." Mueller had learned to distinguish between different aircraft types by their radar signatures during his training. Fighters appeared as small, fast-moving blips that often disappeared between antenna rotations. Medium bombers showed up as larger contacts with steadier movement patterns. But these signatures were different, massive returns that remained visible throughout each sweep, indicating aircraft much larger than anything German forces typically encountered. Chief Petty Officer Weber, standing behind the radar operator, studied the display with growing concern. Weber had served in the North Sea patrol area for 3 years and had tracked hundreds of Allied aircraft formations. The size and consistency of these radar returns suggested something unprecedented. "Lieutenant Mueller," Weber said quietly, "I've been tracking Allied flights since 1941, and I've never seen contacts this strong. These aircraft must be enormous." Kruger nodded, keeping his binoculars trained on the distant sky. The weather was clearing rapidly, morning fog dissipating under the warming sun, and visibility had improved to nearly 10 miles. Perfect conditions for spotting approaching aircraft. The sea state was calm, with swells of less than 3 feet, providing an ideal platform for accurate gun-laying should hostile action become necessary. The Admiral had dealt with Allied reconnaissance flights before, typically formations of 12 to 24 bombers escorted by fighters, conducting intelligence-gathering missions over German-controlled waters. Standard procedure was to report their position and continue with assigned patrol duties unless specifically ordered to engage. "Lieutenant Hoffman," Kruger called to his gunnery officer, "prepare the main battery for possible engagement. Training only. Do not load or aim the guns." "Aye, Admiral," Hoffman responded, immediately moving to his fire control station. The cruiser's main armament could engage aircraft at ranges up to 15,000 yards, using proximity-fused shells designed specifically for anti-aircraft work. However, hitting fast-moving targets required precise prediction of aircraft movement and perfect timing of shell detonation. "Signal Fleet Command," Kruger ordered his communications officer. "Large enemy formation approaching our position. Request immediate fighter support." The response came back within minutes. No fighters were available. The nearest airfield was dealing with maintenance issues, and the backup squadron was already engaged in operations over Denmark. The Prince Hermann and her escort of 2 destroyers would face whatever was coming alone. At 0620 hours, the first aircraft became visible as tiny specks against the clearing morning sky. Muller's radar was now showing the formation at 20 miles and closing rapidly, but something was wrong with the numbers. The screen showed not 60 aircraft, but over 100, then 150. The young lieutenant tapped his instruments, certain there was a malfunction. "Admiral," Mueller called, his voice now uncertain. "Sir, I'm reading multiple formations. The radar is showing, and it's showing over 200 contacts now." Kruger lowered his binoculars and walked to the radar station. The green screen displayed a sight that made his blood run cold. What had appeared to be a single large formation was actually wave after wave of aircraft, stretched across a front of nearly 30 miles. The scope showed contacts extending beyond the maximum range of their equipment. "This cannot be accurate," Kruger muttered, studying the display. "Check your calibration." But Mueller had already run every diagnostic he knew. The radar was functioning perfectly. The Allied formation approaching them contained more aircraft than had ever been assembled in a single operation over the North Sea. At 06:30, with the formation now 15 miles away, individual aircraft became clearly visible through the binoculars. What Kruger saw defied everything he understood about Allied capabilities. The sky was filled with bombers, massive four-engine aircraft flying in perfect formation, stretching from horizon to horizon. Behind them came more formations, and behind those, still more. Captain Werner Dietrich, commanding the escort destroyer Volker, radioed the flagship with growing amazement in his voice. "Admiral, my spotters have stopped counting individual aircraft at 300. There are more formations behind them, extending beyond visual range. Sir, my gunnery officer reports that our anti-aircraft ammunition would be exhausted before we could engage even 1/10 of this formation." The Falk displaced 2,600 tons and carried 5 5-inch guns designed primarily for surface warfare. Her anti-aircraft armament consisted of smaller caliber weapons with limited range and ammunition capacity. Against a formation of this size, her defensive capabilities were virtually meaningless. "Admiral," continued Dietrich, "Chief Gunner's mate Schultz has been tracking aircraft for 15 years. He says he has never seen anything approaching this scale. The formations are maintaining perfect spacing and altitude. These are not inexperienced crews." The magnitude of what they were witnessing began to sink in throughout the small German flotilla. This was not a reconnaissance mission or even a large bombing raid. This was something entirely different, a demonstration of production capacity that revealed just how thoroughly the Allies had outstripped German manufacturing capabilities. Aboard the Prinz Hermann, the ship's senior officers gathered around the bridge, each studying the approaching formation through binoculars. Executive Officer Commander Hans Richter, a veteran of North Atlantic convoy operations, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "Admiral," Richter said quietly, "if they can assemble formations of this size for demonstration purposes, what does this say about their actual combat capability? Our intelligence estimates of Allied production must have been completely wrong." The formation's approach created a sound unlike anything the German sailors had ever experienced. The combined noise of over 3,000 aircraft engines created a thunderous roar that grew steadily louder as the bombers drew closer. Individual engine sounds merged into a continuous mechanical symphony that seemed to shake the very air around the ships. Technical Sergeant Bill Martinez, flight engineer aboard Patterson's lead bomber, monitored engine performance on his instrument panel. 4 tachometers showed each engine operating at exactly 2,100 revolutions per minute, maintaining cruise power settings that would provide maximum range and fuel efficiency. Oil pressure gauges indicated normal operation. Coolant temperatures remained within acceptable limits. "Colonel," Martinez reported over the intercom, "all engines operating normally. Fuel consumption on target for planned mission duration. We're burning approximately 250 gallons per hour total." The fuel consumption statistics for the entire formation were staggering. 847 bombers, each burning 250 gallons per hour, consumed over 200,000 gallons during their 4-hour mission. This single demonstration flight used more aviation fuel than German combat operations typically consumed in an entire week. Kruger picked up his radio handset. His training demanded that he report what he was seeing, no matter how incredible it seemed. Fleet Command needed to know about this formation, needed to understand what the Allies had achieved. "Control, this is Admiral Kruger aboard Prinz Hermann. We have visual contact with the approaching formation." He paused, watching as more aircraft continued to appear on the horizon. "Control, we have them. We have caught them completely in the open." There was pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a naval commander who had successfully detected and reported a major enemy operation. According to every tactical manual he had studied, catching such a large formation over open water should have been a significant intelligence victory. But as the formations continued to approach, the true scope of what they were seeing became impossible to ignore. The bombers were flying in groups of 36 aircraft each, arranged in combat boxes that extended across the entire visible sky. Muller's radar was now detecting contacts at maximum range in every direction. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson was leading the lead formation in his Boeing aircraft, a massive bomber weighing 65,000 pounds when fully loaded. The aircraft, Serial number 4230712 had rolled off the production line at the Seattle facility just 6 weeks earlier. Her 4 Wright Cyclone engines, each developing 1,200 horsepower, had accumulated just 47 hours of flight time since delivery. Patterson himself was 31 years old, a former commercial pilot from Chicago who had enlisted immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor. His crew of 10 represented a cross-section of American youth: Bombardier Mike O'Connor from Boston, navigator Tom Richardson from Kansas, flight engineer Bill Martinez from Los Angeles, radio operator Dave Thompson from Ohio, and 6 gunners ranging in age from 19 to 25. The aircraft's bomb bay, normally loaded with 10,000 pounds of explosives, carried only fuel for this extended mission. Her defensive armament remained fully operational: 13 .50-caliber machine guns mounted in powered turrets that could engage enemy fighters from any angle. The ball turret beneath the fuselage alone contained 2 guns with 500 rounds each. Today's operation was different from their usual tactical missions against industrial targets in occupied Europe. Patterson's unit, the 391st Bombardment Group, had flown 23 combat missions since arriving in England 8 months earlier. They had participated in the major raids against aircraft factories, oil refineries, and transportation networks that were systematically dismantling German industrial capacity. His aircraft was one of 847 bombers participating in the mission. Behind his formation flew wave after wave of identical aircraft, products of American factories, that were now producing heavy bombers at a rate of 16 aircraft per day. The Boeing plant in Seattle operated 3 shifts around the clock, with workers arriving by bus and streetcar from housing projects built specifically for aircraft production workers. The production statistics were staggering. Each bomber required 37,000 individual parts, sourced from suppliers across the United States. Wings were manufactured in one facility, fuselages in another, engines at Wright Aeronautical in Ohio. Final assembly brought together components that had traveled thousands of miles by rail and truck. The formation represented just 4 days of production from a single manufacturing facility. While Patterson flew his mission over the North Sea, 16 more bombers were rolling off the assembly line back home. Quality control inspectors checked every rivet, every wire, every control surface before approving aircraft for delivery. Test pilots flew each bomber through a complete performance evaluation before acceptance by military authorities. "Navigator," Patterson called over the intercom, "what's our time to target?" 5 minutes to the German naval formation, Colonel," came the reply. "Weather is clear, visibility unlimited." The mission parameters were specific: fly directly over the German ships at 8,000 feet, maintain formation integrity, and continue to the designated coordinates before returning to base. No hostile action was planned. This was purely a demonstration of capability. From his position in the nose of the aircraft, Bombardier Lieutenant Mike O'Connor had a perfect view of the German ships below. Through his Norden bomb sight, he could see the cruiser and its escorts clearly, could even make out individual personnel on the decks. "They're definitely getting a good look at us," O'Connor reported. "I can see their gun crews tracking our formation." The irony was not lost on Patterson. 4 years earlier, German production had seemed unstoppable. Their shipyards were launching submarines faster than the Allies could sink them. Their aircraft factories were producing fighters and bombers in numbers that dominated European skies. Now the situation had completely reversed. Back aboard the Prince Hermann, Admiral Kruger stood transfixed as the formation passed overhead. The sound was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very air around them. Wave after wave of bombers passed overhead, their formations so precise they seemed like aerial parades. "Count them," Kruger ordered his staff. "I want an exact count of every aircraft in this formation." The count continued for 47 minutes. 847 bombers passed over the German ships in perfect formation. Behind them came the escorts, fighters that outnumbered the bombers 2 to 1. The total count exceeded 2,500 aircraft. What Kruger could not have known was the true significance of what he was witnessing. The formation represented the output of American aircraft factories during a single week in May 1944. While German production facilities were struggling to maintain output of 30 aircraft per month, American factories were delivering over 700 completed aircraft every 7 days. The industrial capacity that made such formations possible was staggering beyond European comprehension. The Boeing factory alone employed 42,000 workers operating in 3 shifts around the clock. Raw materials arrived by train every hour of every day. Aluminum ingots from plants in the Pacific Northwest, steel components from mills in Pennsylvania and Ohio, rubber products from facilities that had converted from automobile tire production. Aluminum ingots weighing 2,000 pounds each were transformed into finished aircraft wings in less than 72 hours. Massive hydraulic presses, some weighing over 500 tons, shaped wing sections with precision measured in thousandths of an inch. Engines rolled off production lines at Wright Aeronautical at a rate of 1 every 23 minutes, each one tested on dynamometers that simulated combat operating conditions. The logistical network supporting this production was equally impressive. Railroad cars specially designed for aircraft transport carried fuselage sections and wing assemblies from component factories to final assembly plants. Trucking companies operated dedicated fleets for moving smaller components, with drivers working around the clock to maintain delivery schedules. Quality control procedures exceeded anything attempted in German factories. Each bomber required inspection at 17 separate stages of production. Test pilots flew every aircraft through a complete performance evaluation before military acceptance. Maintenance crews performed detailed inspections of engines, control systems, and defensive armament before operational deployment. Training facilities produced aircrew at rates that matched aircraft production. Flying schools operated across the United States, graduating bombardiers, navigators, pilots, and gunners in numbers sufficient to crew every aircraft rolling off assembly lines. The training program consumed enormous resources, fuel, aircraft, instructors, and support personnel, but ensured that combat units received properly prepared crews. The broader economic implications were equally staggering. Aircraft production employed over 1 million Americans directly, with millions more working in supporting industries. Steel mills, aluminum smelters, rubber plants, electronics manufacturers, and countless smaller suppliers had converted their operations to serve the aircraft industry. Captain Dietrich's voice crackled over the radio from the destroyer Falk. "Admiral, the formation is still passing overhead. My men have counted over 1,500 aircraft, and they're still coming." The psychological impact on the German sailors was profound. Many had never seen more than 20 Allied aircraft at one time. The idea that the Allies could assemble over 2,000 aircraft for a single demonstration mission was beyond their comprehension. Lieutenant Müller abandoned his attempt to track individual aircraft. His radar screen was completely saturated with contacts. The formation extended beyond the maximum range of his equipment in every direction. For all he knew, there could have been 5,000 aircraft in the formation. "Sir," Müller reported, his voice now subdued, "the formation extends beyond our detection capability. We cannot determine the total number." As the last of the bombers disappeared over the eastern horizon, Admiral Kruger faced a devastating realization. Everything he had been told about Allied production capabilities had been wrong. Not slightly wrong, not moderately wrong, but catastrophically wrong. The formation he had just witnessed represented industrial capacity that exceeded German production by a factor of 10 to 1. The radio crackled again. Fleet Command was requesting his report on the enemy formation. Kruger hesitated before responding. How could he possibly explain what he had just seen? How could he describe an aerial armada that defied every assumption about Allied capabilities? "Control," he finally radioed. "This is Admiral Kruger. The enemy formation has passed over our position. Initial count. Initial count exceeds 2,000 aircraft." The silence on the radio was telling. Fleet Command was undoubtedly assuming he had made an error, that he had somehow miscounted, or that his equipment was malfunctioning. No one would believe that the Allies could assemble such a massive formation for a simple demonstration mission. But Kruger knew what he had seen. More importantly, he understood what it meant. The war was not simply going badly for Germany. It was already over. The industrial capacity that could produce such formations meant that German resistance was ultimately futile. The formations continued eastward, eventually reaching their designated coordinates before turning south toward their bases in England. For the aircrew participating in the mission, it had been routine, another training flight, another demonstration of capability. They landed at their bases that evening, debriefed and prepared for the next day's missions. For Admiral Kruger and his men, the impact was far more profound. That night, as the Prinz Hermann sailed back toward port, the Admiral stood alone on the bridge, staring at the stars and contemplating what he had witnessed. In his private log, Kruger wrote, "Today I saw the future of this conflict. We are facing an enemy whose industrial capacity exceeds our own, by margins we never imagined possible. The formation that passed over us today represents not the maximum Allied effort, but merely what they consider routine capability." The demonstration had achieved exactly what Allied command had intended. Word of the massive formation spread through the German naval command structure. Officers who had never questioned their ability to continue the fight began to understand the true scope of Allied production capabilities. Within weeks, similar formations were appearing over German positions throughout Europe. The psychological impact was devastating. German soldiers and sailors who had fought with determination for years began to understand that they were facing an enemy whose production capabilities were virtually unlimited. The intelligence reports that reached higher command painted a grim picture. American factories were not only producing aircraft at unprecedented rates, but the quality and capability of those aircraft was improving with each production run. New bomber variants appeared monthly, each more capable than the last. German production, by contrast, was struggling to maintain even basic output levels. Raw materials were becoming scarce, skilled workers were being conscripted for military service, and Allied bombing campaigns were systematically destroying manufacturing facilities. Admiral Kruger's radio transmission, "Control, we have caught them completely in the open," became a bitter reminder of how thoroughly German leadership had misunderstood the strategic situation. They had caught the Allied formation exactly as intended, and what they had seen was not weakness, but overwhelming strength. The formation that passed over the Prinz Hermann that day represented just a tiny fraction of Allied air capability. Similar demonstrations were occurring simultaneously over other parts of Europe, each designed to show German forces the futility of continued resistance. For Lieutenant Müller, the young radar operator, the experience was transformative. Years later, he would describe that morning as the moment he first understood that Germany had lost the conflict. The sight of over 2,000 aircraft flying in perfect formation had destroyed any illusions about German chances for victory. The Allied planners who conceived the demonstration mission understood the psychological impact it would have. By showing German forces the true scale of Allied production capabilities, they hoped to shorten the conflict and reduce casualties on both sides. The industrial statistics behind the formation were staggering. The bombers alone represented over 55 million pounds of aluminum, 169,000 horsepower of engine output, and the labor of over 200,000 workers. The formation consumed more fuel in a single mission than German aircraft used in an entire month. But perhaps the most telling statistic was this. The formation that so impressed Admiral Kruger represented exactly 4 days and 6 hours of American aircraft production. While German factories struggled to build 30 aircraft per month, American production lines were delivering more aircraft than that every single day. The demonstration mission of May 12, 1944, marked a turning point in the conflict. German naval commanders who witnessed similar formations began to understand that continued resistance was hopeless. The industrial capacity that could produce such overwhelming force was beyond their ability to counter. Admiral Kruger returned to port that evening a changed man. He had begun the day confident in his ability to detect and report enemy formations. He ended it understanding that Germany was facing an enemy whose capabilities exceeded anything in human history. The Prinz Hermann would be sunk 3 months later during the evacuation of German forces from Norway. Admiral Kruger survived the conflict and spent his remaining years trying to explain to anyone who would listen how completely German leadership had misunderstood Allied production capabilities. Lieutenant Mueller emigrated to America after the conflict ended, eventually becoming an engineer in the very aircraft factories whose output had so amazed him that morning over the North Sea. The demonstration formations continued throughout the summer of 1944. Each mission reinforced the same message. Allied production capabilities were so far beyond German capacity that resistance was futile. The psychological impact of these demonstrations was measured not in destroyed targets, but in the growing understanding among German forces that the conflict was already decided. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.